And two thoughts are flashing through my mind. The first one is that's a tough act to follow. And the second one is how in tune we are, because her story about being seasick and crossing the storm and preparing yourself to move on is exactly what we're talking about today. Because we all have storms in our lives. We all have times when we're so torn up we in effect get seasick. We're sick and we almost become immobile. And it seems like it's the worst hour of our life. And it seems like there is no hope, and yet there is that distant shore that we are looking to move towards. So it's a wonderful reminder that on the shore we have a chance to change and begin again. And what I heard in your song was about love. And that's what I think that we have to remember, is that there is that divine source that absolutely is in love with us. And when you know that you are absolutely cared for and weathered through any storm. Any storm. Today's talk was inspired by the Joyous Living. Oh, I'm sorry.
Brian is here, so we will part.
I apologize. We're having our youth.
We're just going in the flow.
Go with that. Go with that. So this week, when I was preparing for this, what I realized in reading the Joyous Living Journal and looking at what the stories were in that and how this really related to preparing for the divine light, because what we know as religious science and New Thought is that there's a Christ consciousness. That Christ was not Jesus' last name, but it was a title, it was an awareness, it was an enlightenment. It meant the enlightened one. And so that's what we know, is that we prepare ourselves to remember that divine moment, that our connection. And I realized how much of this was for me. So I was doing my work all week and writing it and thinking, I hope you guys have as much fun and enjoyment with all this, because what it took me for was the deepness and the awareness. And along the way, I discovered something, and I posted it on a Facebook page that I want to share with you. It's a combination of Jesus and Horace. The similarities, Jesus was written 2,000 years ago. Horus was a story written 5,000 years ago. Horus was an Egyptian god. There are certain similarities. Both were born of a virgin. Both have birthdays that are celebrated on December 25th. The North Star led wise men to where Jesus was born. The Eastern Star led 3 wise men to where Horus was born. That Jesus was taken to Egypt to escape the wrath of Herod. Horus was taken to Egypt to escape the wrath of Typhoon. Jesus was taught in the temple as a child. Horus was taught in the temple as a child. Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist at 30. Horus was baptized by Anup the baptizer at 30. Jesus had 12 disciples. Horus had 12 disciples. Jesus performed miracles and walked on water. Horus performed miracles and walked on water. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Horus raised El-Azor from the dead. Jesus was transfigured on a mount. Horus was transfigured on a mount. The reason I bring that up is that sometimes we get caught up in the story. And so we think the story is real. And is it really as important whether the story is real or not, as much as the ritual, that rebirth that we get to experience each time? It's a chance for rejuvenation, for our reconnection to spirit, to our connection to the Christ that exists within each one of us. It could be our story 2,000 years after Jesus, 5,000 years after Horus. Our story. It's also important to know because sometimes we get so caught up in our story. We believe it. And yet our story is about a life we do not want. It's about a story of crossing a stormy sea to an island of refuge. But we hang on to it because it seems real to us. And we forget the Christ within us. That Christ consciousness within us. I was doing a counseling for a person over a period of time, and he has been troubled, and he calls me usually when he's troubled, and he says, you know, I'm having this go on, da 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 da. And it's usually always about the negative forces. It's the storms in his life. It's the things he cannot overcome, and he cannot see beyond the waves. And he is afraid that his life is going to be swamped. And he goes to fear. And yet this is a person who's practiced New Thought for years and understands New Thought. But is so caught up in the storm of his life right now that is difficult. So this part, I always have a two-edged sword here. And I call it a sword because I want to cut through it. The first part is I want to be compassionate with them. But the second part is I am not his friend at that moment. I'm his practitioner and his minister, and I know the truth about him. And if I go as his friend, I go down the pity party with him. I get on the boat. I'm in the storm, in the sea, and I say, oh, you poor dear. Yes, you're seasick, and I'm so sorry for you. And I become seasick with him. That is not my role. My role is to see the land and to know that we are going to reach it. And so my role is to help point it out, but what happens is sometimes, and I've had this work with a few other clients, but sometimes I wonder about myself, knowing the absolute truth, because I get to the point where they're ready to pray, and they'll say, one more thing. And I'll say, well, okay, and they'll go right back into it. Right back into it. They're so attached. And I'll say, you're back into the fear, and I'm ready to pray, and I can know these truths because I already know this truth for you. And they say, but you don't understand. But I do understand. I understand that you're so attached, you want your story. Even though you're saying you don't want your story, you want it. Because it says something for you. That's where you are. And so what I try to do is say, what is it? And I try to get it as simple as I can, get it down to a quality of God. Because when you get it down to one word as a quality, you get rid of the emotions that are attached to all of it. So that doesn't mean that we're not compassionate, for we are compassionate. But my compassion goes to knowing the truth for you. To knowing the truth that you are the light. You are, like Jen saying, you will reach the shore. Your awareness, it is the light. You will make it through that. Ernest Holmes says, the word gives form to the unformed. The greater the consciousness behind the word, the more power it will have. And this person understands that, because they would say it, and he said, but you don't know how I feel. I have this feeling and I can't do anything with it. And yes, I know the feelings create my environment, but I have this feeling. And I say, yes, you even absolutely understand it at such a base level. You could be your own teacher. You could be your own teacher, because you know that the power of your treatment, the power of your prayer, the power behind your manifestation of what you are seeing is absolutely the feelings you put behind it. And when you become attached to the feelings, you will remain in what I think the Buddha was talking about in the suffering. Our freedom is to let go of our attachment. Our freedom is knowing that there is a shore. Somehow I'm reminded of the 12 apostles of the rocking boat. And Jesus, they wake Jesus up from a nap, saying, calm the waters because there's fear. And he admonishes them for their lack of belief and trust. And that's what we do to ourselves. We want to remind ourselves how powerful we are. We are not weak victims. We are powerful to the point where I think sometimes it scares us. And it's those of us who were raised in faith traditions where it was not prudent or wise to believe that we are one with the divine. It's really hard for us to overcome that childhood memory. It's like imprinted on our very inner being, but I know it's not imprinted on our souls. Our souls came here to be free and to have us expand and love and joy. Know that we are a light upon the world. And knowing that that is absolutely the truth, we have to move through that. I was listening to a videotape of Josh Reeves, who is our minister up in Seal Beach, and he graduated with me. He's an outstanding young man. I don't even think he's 30 yet. And it's just like he's been anointed to reach out and touch young people, and he is just awesome. He was speaking in Santa Rosa last Sunday. And he was talking about his spiritual practice, which I love because some of us get all caught up in the trappings. Do you know what I mean by that? All of that stuff we think spiritual practice means, and we think it's all about the form, and we forget the substance, the essence of it. And that's what he was talking. He was talking about his connection and how he starts off in his spiritual practice in the morning. He says he sits down with two tools, coffee and his book on spiritual reading. And what he does is he sits there and he starts contemplating and appreciating his day. And appreciating his body for being the gift that it is. Then he starts appreciating what the good he has in his life. And he starts appreciating his connection with the divine. And he starts appreciating that with his connection, he knows that all is whole, perfect, and complete, just as it is, regardless of appearances. And there is in that moment of appreciation that he enters into the quietude and he can go within, and he absolutely has that connection because he's prepared himself by appreciating all that he has in his life and his connection to the divine. And I was so touched by that because what happens, and what sometimes I counsel people to do, is when you are in that moment of rough seas of your life, if you can focus on just one thing that you are grateful for, if you can pull that in with all the emotional feelings of why you are grateful for that, and if that's all you can manage that day, that is enough. And then the next day, can you double that? Can you think of 2 things you can appreciate about your life? And the third day, 3 things. What I believe will happen to you is when you do that, is by the time you have moved to the week and you have reached 7 things you appreciate about your life, you will not be in the rough seas anymore.